a couple of weeks ago, or a month or so ago at the time of recording, you have effectively retired, for lack of a better word. You are now, you're keeping yourself busy. And one of those things that you're keeping yourself busy with in retirement is writing. And so going back to the top of this episode and how Natalie Mabayo's post about you and your work brought me to asking you to be on this episode. The specific post that she referred to was called From Knowledge to Wisdom, Value Creation in the Age of LLMs. And this is all about wise AI, the thing that we started talking about right at the top of this episode. So tell us generally about what wise AI is, your vision here. I mean, you already talked about it at the beginning of the episode with respect to this idea of increasing human agency as opposed to just being focused on agentic AI systems. So using LLMs, using AI to enhance human agency and make us the wisest, best versions of ourselves, helping us with our metacognition. So actually, maybe in the outset of today's episode, you already kind of talked about that enough. There may be other things that have occurred to you that you'd like to add now. But one of the things that I would definitely like to get to is that there are some complexities that arise. There are some challenges that arise from LLMs, and there's a lot of labs that are explicitly chasing artificial general intelligence, which is this idea of a single algorithm that can do any of the learning that a human could do. But in many ways, it would be different than human intelligence. In some ways, more powerful than human intelligence because of the huge breadth. So you were telling me, I think it was prior to us starting recording, about t-shirt sizes, and where you have the width of the t-shirt and the height of the t-shirt. So maybe you can kind of go into that analogy and explain that. But basically, these LLMs, these AI systems, as we approach AGI, as more and more tasks can be done by LLMs, the marginal cost of creating so many things, code, art, it trends towards zero. And that presents really interesting implications for humans, for what our purpose is, how we value ourselves, what we should be doing.
Yeah. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So let me like zoom out a bit, right? So so first of all, I think I'm not aware of a single like consensus definition of what AGI is. It feels like it's one of those things where the goalposts keep shifting on what it truly means. Um, and so zooming out, like when I wrote that post, right, it was just a stream of consciousness. I'm frankly still trying to rack my head around a lot of these ideas, and it's sort of like that post was sort of open source blogging, where I'm like blogging in real time about what I'm thinking. And the way I wanted to approach it is, rather than predicting where things are going to go or what is the sci-fi future with AGI look like, just gaining more clarity on where are we now, like what is happening right now, looking from a first principles basis on what the relevant curves are right now, and then extrapolating them just a little bit, and then seeing, okay, what are the implications of that if you do that, and then extrapolating them just a little bit more and seeing the implications of that, and so forth. And especially because there's just so much like hype and snake oil about what's going on with AI, and so that I wanted to start with the actual like numbers and curves, right? And so the first thing that occurred to me is that people have said this a lot over the internet, is that with every year, two things are simultaneously happening. The models are becoming a lot better on all the benchmarks, right? Like Claude today versus last year, Gemini, ChatGPT, like these models, where they are at the time of recording versus where they were 12 months ago, like way better, just generally way better. But at the same time, for that same functionality, the cost of inference has just dropped by orders of magnitude. Context windows have substantially increased. In some sense, latency has improved because we're seeing smaller models that could do the same thing that previous models could do. And all of this, frankly, mirrors what we've seen elsewhere in computing, right? Is that first the big expensive thing comes out and the cheaper things come out. And it's not just computing. It's like the Tesla Roadster comes out before the Model S and before the Model 3, right? And so that's where I started. And then one of the things, as you pointed out at the start of the episode, is one of the things that people have been using these models for is for productivity enhancements for software engineers, right? Like Cursor, Lovable, like all these startups, Replit, Copilot in GitHub. And so if you plot that curve, like it's pretty astonishing the way that curve is moving. And then if you just extrapolate it, like I've already started seeing this phenomena where people that weren't traditional software engineers or wouldn't have identified as software engineers, the act of producing software is just much more approachable to them now because these tools exist, not just in the act of like generating the code itself, but understanding what a piece of code is doing, understanding some obscure thing, like just the practice of generating and delivering software is becoming much more accessible. And then so that's the curve. So then I started thinking, okay, well, there seems to be a feedback loop driving these two things, and that's a separate thing that we could potentially talk about. But the important thing is that curve there seems to be a lot of momentum and force behind that curve. And so if you start extrapolating that curve to its logical conclusion, what do you get? What does that look like? And two things started falling out. The first one is that just as how you had the emergence of full stack engineers after, the open source LAMP stack came out a few years ago, my suspicion is that what you will start to have is the emergence of what I'm calling full stack employees or something like that. Where, for example, imagine go back to a pre-LLM world where you had some UX designers, a PM, and a bunch of engineers on a team. And let's say the PM wants to like think about shipping a new feature. Well, in the old world, they would have had to like write up a PRD, get some UXer to make a mock, get the engineering manager to agree to like prioritize. Like it would have been this huge thing to like kind of align the team towards that new feature. The world we're rapidly approaching is that the PM, assuming that team is using AI assisted tools, can just create a prototype that you wouldn't actually ship, but they can just go to the eng manager or they could go to the team with generated mocks and a generated prototype, showing the interaction, showing what it could kind of look like, and kind of maybe already doing some user research with the prototype and substantially de-risking it before an engineer, quote unquote, ever actually spends a single second thinking about whether it should actually be prioritized or not. That's just like a very near-term thing, right? And so what I'm describing there is a sort of fluidity to the way roles are likely going to work, right? And so if you keep extrapolating from that curve, if you assume that the models are going to continue getting better and cheaper, then what you start seeing is it's not clear to me what the organization of the future looks like. Right now, many organizations are organized kind of functionally in the sense that there are the PMs in one org, the UXers in one org, the engineers in one org, or maybe there are different permutations of how, but that role of a PM, a UX, and Eng is pretty like reasonably well defined in terms of consensus in the industry, right? But if you now reach this world where these AI-enabled tools can just accelerate you in these unforeseen ways, that injects a lot of nebulosity in how, or like fluidity in how these teams are organized. And so the model I've been thinking of recently is that's what I mean by full stack employee, where they're thinking not just within their narrow parochial domain, they're thinking across the stack, end to end, in how that team or that unit of people delivers value in the broader organization, right? Because like one way you can view these roles is they're a product, they're a bundle of skills, right? And it's like, I don't know who said it. It's like there's always like either bundling or unbundling is how you create value. It's like maybe what we're seeing is the beginnings of an unbundling of the aggregated set of skills that you see inside of a team so that they can be dynamically rebundled in different ways depending on the idiosyncratic needs of that organization or team, right? And that's pretty crazy when you think about it, right? And then at the same time, uh, because these models are just generally available, right? Like what I've also started wondering, I'm noticing, is that not just is the cost of delivering software for fixed complexity going to go down rapidly, proportionate, to the quality of the models or the cost of inference or whatnot, but the cost of reproduction is also going to go down. So, say for example, you create some website, you make some SaaS thing or whatever, and you're actually not super differentiated in the market, right? The cost of me reproducing that and assuming I can somehow, like, I don't want to differentiate with you either for whatever reason, and I want to race to the bottom with you, right? Even if you assume the LLM and whatever will have certain unit economics, that there's a really fascinating dynamic there where lots of kind of products and services suddenly become much more competitive than they used to be in the past, unless they're extraordinarily differentiated. And so a natural conclusion that I went, and again, these are all assumptions, right? There's a lot of chains of ifs here, but I started wondering, like, oh wow, does the software industry start to resemble the music industry way more, where like there are one or two artists that can change like the hotel prices in any city they visit, and almost everyone else is like at the very opposite end of that spectrum, right? Unless they're providing an extremely differentiated product or service that allows them to maintain like competitive advantage and keep those profits going. um, and then that brought me this is kind of like I'm trying to thread all the things you mentioned, and this is what actually brings us to wisdom, right? Because where do good ideas come from? Because if what we're saying is that if what we're saying is that in the world of bits, right, not in the world of atoms, that maybe has a different set of dynamics to it, but we can talk about that. I know a lot less about the world of atoms and what it takes to manufacture and whatever. But if what we're really saying is that the economic curve that seems to have a lot of momentum behind it, and again, this isn't a binary thing, right? It's going to be like a gradient, right? But also like discontinuous, where like maybe if you're a small enough team, what that means is you just don't hire a PM for a while if you can just all do it yourselves. You just don't hire too many engineers if you can do it. Like it creates, as the curve, even though the curve itself may be smooth, the consequences might be very like non-smooth and discontinuous in the impact it has in the market, right? And that's very difficult to predict. But if you keep like going along this curve, and if you see that, oh, okay, the value of differentiating properly in the market is only going to increase, and that means that there's going to be greater and greater premiums on kind of insight, the systemic cultivation of insight, right? Where do good ideas come from? Well, it comes from human beings, right? And then you could also talk about like sci-fi, about like models do it or whatever. There's a bunch of philosophy there. We don't have to go into that unless you want to. But for this thought experiment, let's just say that there are still human stakeholders at the end of the day in the incorporation of the company and whatever. Where do humans get good ideas? Well, it turns out a lot of the literature, or at least, I'm still very much a student of this, and like I said, I'm still learning this, but it seems that there is a lot of similarity between the various processes for the proactive cultivation of wisdom and the proactive cultivation of curiosity, open-mindedness, exploration, overall adaptability, right? And so if you take all these ideas seriously, it's sort of like in a world where knowledge is becoming rapidly commoditized, the key differentiator is to the extent that you are wise as a person. How pro-social are you? How like valuable are you to the community? And how self-authored are you? Right? And by self-authored, I don't mean like I have the license to be an but like are you in the Joseph Campbell sense following your bliss, right? Like are you voluntarily kind of going individuating and going along your life path and cultivating wisdom. Um, and so that kind of ended with talking to Natalie and talking to a few folks. Is that's why like I think what excites me about this technology isn't the act of kind of merely automating things, because that very rapidly, that framing takes you to a world of, I think, one way to look at that frame is it takes you to a world of perfect competition potentially, which is not what you want. If you want to for lots of reasons, that's not the world you want to live in. But if you want to lead, like create differentiated value in the economy, what that takes you is you don't want, it's not, the framing for me is it like, how can the models, how can these AI systems be more agentic? It's how can I be more agentic, right? And it is by me being more agentic, I will hit my own limiting assumptions, behaviors, whatever, and then therefore grow in wisdom. And so, how can I integrate this technology as part of my cognitive stack to be a more effective human being in meeting my aspirational goals, whether that is showing up in a certain way for my family, friends, community, etc., for my business. And so that's kind of how I kind of tie all that together. And then once I started, like it's still there's large sections of this map that are very unclear to me. But once I started seeing this thread, I've been interested in meditation and wisdom practices and stuff for many years now, therapy. But that became really powerful for me because I started getting curious, like how can you start connecting these things together? And what does it mean to connect them together? And what does it mean, like, and that ended up having deep insight also in how to effectively wield these models, because I forget who said this. It's like the medium is the message, right? We use natural language to talk to these things. Language was made by humans for humans. These models obviously aren't human, and language makes lots of cognitive assumptions about humanity. And so I think it takes you to some really interesting places in how you can interface with these machines much more effectively to create value in the world. And so that's kind of like my ramble off the through line.